Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching Big Picture with me, Vishal Dahiya, and today we will talk about the expectations from United States President Donald Trump's visit to India. Now, the US President Donald Trump is all set to travel for his first visit to India on 24th and 25th of February. He will be accompanied by a high-level delegation, which is likely to include his son-in-law, US Secretary of Treasury, Commerce, officials from National Security Council, and several PIOs as well. India and United States relations are based on shared democratic values and growing convergence on bilateral, regional and global issues as well. While the much anticipated trade agreement between both nations has been downplayed by the President Trump himself, but both sides are likely to sign a number of key deals during this visit. So what are the key expectations from this visit of the US President Donald Trump to India? For more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of guests. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Mr. Kamal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary. We also have with us Mr. Navtesh Sharna, former ambassador to United States and several other countries as well. And we also have with us Mr. Indrani Bagchi, diplomatic editor at the Times of India. Let me begin with you, Mr. Sibal, and let's try and understand this visit in the context of that long-standing relationship which both India and United States have shared and the way that relationship has grown over the past few years.
Well, there has been a transformation of our ties with the United States. That's very clear. Since 2005, when we signed the nuclear deal effectively, a lot of the issues that stood in the way of having a very broad-based cooperation, especially technological, which is very important for India in terms of the modernization of its economy, those issues got out of the way. And along with that, our relations with so many other countries, especially the allies of the United States, who are following the United States in sanctioning us in terms of transfers of technologies and dual-use technologies. Relations with them got normalized. And then very importantly, very importantly, we had virtually no defense relationship with the United States, even until the time I was Foreign Secretary. But in the last 10, 11 years, about $18 billion worth of defense deals have been signed, which in fact is a investment in trust in the United States, because this US system is such that we can always have difficulties and problems and situations where sanctions can be applied, and it's not imaginary even now. Under CATSA, America is interfering in our relations with Russia, and on the S-400 issue there is still a sword of Damocles hanging overhead. But nevertheless, I think the feeling has been that the relationship has deepened enough, broadened enough, and mutuality of interest is significant enough to be able to take this risk. And this defense relationship is expanding. In terms of the diaspora, when I was in Washington many years ago, we had only about 1 million Indians. Today there are 4 million Indians. And they are contributing a great deal to the US economy itself, but also in building ties between India and United States. And number of students, 200,000 Indian students in the United States. So at the people-to-people level, the relationship is more dense than it is with any other country. So there are lots of very positives in our relationship, and the trajectory of our relationship is such that I don't foresee any serious setback, despite difficulties which we can discuss later. And I'll end by saying that the primary interest of the United States in India is economic. And they see India's rise. We are already the 5th largest economy. By 2030, we'll be the 3rd largest. By 2050, hopefully the 2nd largest. It's a huge market, huge demography. And therefore, they are interested in establishing close economic ties with a rising economic power. And now, of course, the China factor has come in, because we are the only country that can really stand up to China and counter China. So there is that geopolitical interest too.
Okay, so there it is. You're saying that primary interest for the Americans is the economic aspect also. But if you look at the reports which are coming in, the trade deal, much anticipated, is something which might not happen during this particular visit. Ambassador Sarna, you've been there in Washington and you've dealt with the Americans on a one-on-one basis as well, just like Mr. Sibal. But if you look at the relations between both the nations on different aspects, economic, defense cooperation, on the regional issues, on the global issues as well, specifically from the prism of the regional security, then how would you define the relation and the expectations from here onwards?
Well, the relationship is very broad-based today. As Ambassador Sybil said, it's really grown over the last 2 decades. We have a strategic partnership, as we call it. One of the elements is certainly India's growing economy and potential of both a market and as an economic partner. The other aspect is India is seen by Americans, we may not agree with that definition, as a kind of counterbalancing country to China's rise, or certainly one of the countries which can work out a band with America. So there are these other aspects also, and as you mentioned, the regional security aspects. In terms of expectations, I think too many expectations have been laid on the trade deal. And I would try to say that, the fact that the trade deal is not happening or may not happen, I don't think we should hang the visit on one thread. We've always had trade problems with the United States. We have had trade problems, we have had intellectual property rights problems, we've had all sorts of problems. It's not new. What is new is that the priority that the Trump administration, which is unabashedly transactional in its approach, particularly on trade, and the priority that President Trump himself gives to trade, gives this a much higher profile than it normally would have.
Okay.
And other administrations in the past have let these problems ride while moving ahead on issues of on which there was greater convergence. Now that is the difference in this administration. So having said that, I think while trade issues will be something which we will have to continue to work at, we need to be using this opportunity to maximize the strategic convergences that we have. And, we could go into what these are.
We'll look at that aspect as well. But Indrani, would you agree to this aspect that, trade deal alone can't be the only cornerstone of this particular visit or the expectations or the results of this particular visit in terms of both nations achieving something tangible?
So it would have been a good thing if we had done a limited trade deal. And I think that was what was being looked at, and that was what was being negotiated. We could have done it by in September when Prime Minister was in Houston. We could have done it after the UNGA or before. But I believe the differences remain wide, largely because for two reasons. One is the asymmetry between the two economies. Second, I think the US expects much more from India than India is willing to give, because India has its own vulnerabilities within the country, which the US is yet to fully appreciate. I suspect you will see more negotiations over the next few weeks and months. And my understanding is we'll get a trade deal later this year.
Okay.
Or early next year.
Okay, so that might happen in the due course of time. But let's now take all these aspects one by one. Let's start with the regional aspect, regional security, and India's immediate neighborhood as well. If you look at US's Afghan policy, what's happening in Afghanistan vis-a-vis Pakistan as well. So how would you look at the expectations in this particular segment? That's the regional policies which affect India.
Well, there are convergences and divergences. There's a clear divergence on Afghanistan. The United States is negotiating with the Taliban, and it's always been surprising to me that while the United States had declared so many individuals and organizations and even countries as terrorists, they have never declared Taliban as a terrorist organization, where clearly it's a terrorist organization. And not only that, they have inflicted thousands of casualties on US forces in Afghanistan itself. Pakistan has been giving safe haven to the Taliban, to the Haqqani group, and of course Osama bin Laden. And yet, if you look at the manner in which US is sanctioning Russia and Iran in particular, or in North Korea, Pakistan has been spared. And the United States knows that Pakistan is a huge problem for us, and a huge problem potentially for us if, with their support, Taliban comes to power in Afghanistan. But there, we've not been able to reach any serious convergence of thinking because the United States is determined to withdraw from Afghanistan. On Iran, they know they are damaging India's energy security and the future of our ties with Iran. But we are in no position to confront the United States on this as well. And not only us, even its allies, the European allies, are unable to confront the United States because of the economic power of the United States and the hegemony of the dollar. Insofar as the maritime domain is concerned, there is good convergence. And this convergence has expanded over time. The Malabar exercises have expanded. Japan has become a permanent participant. Indo-Pacific concept has now become the talk in any geopolitical survey of this region. United States has renamed this Pacific Command as the Indo-Pacific Command. Now they have, which was a lacuna earlier, extended the concept of Indo-Pacific to the eastern seaboard of Africa. Earlier it was ending in the western coast of India, which means that there is now even greater practical convergence in terms of looking after this maritime space. In the South China Sea and elsewhere, we have the same view. But coming back to Pakistan, one good thing that I have seen is that now the Americans are putting pressure on Pakistan, on the China-Pakistan economic corridor, openly. And if they continue to press on that, and this is in relation to the deteriorating relations with China, that's a good thing for us. And finally, in the past, when I say in the past couple of decades ago or more, US was not very helpful in terms of our larger neighborhood. Now, in fact, they are being helpful in terms of, and again, the China is a factor there, whether it's Nepal or Sri Lanka, they are willing to coordinate with us, and that's helpful.
Okay, so Mr. Sanna, if you look at the US's Afghan policy and the recent happenings as well, that's the deal between Taliban and the United States. It is widely being said that its policy is pretty much, led by the domestic concerns of the United States government. So, one, that aspect. Two, is it the right time for India to go ahead and put its concerns on the table vis-a-vis Afghanistan, Pakistan, to the president who is visiting here?
I think you're on both points. The first one, yes, I think a lot of the consideration on driving the Afghan policy from Washington today is President Trump's clear desire to bring the boys home, preferably before the election. He announced a withdrawal in Syria, and he's been wanting to announce a withdrawal in Afghanistan. Having said that, it's not that President Obama didn't want to withdraw, but I think there are shades to the extent and to how keenly this is being pushed. Certainly, domestic considerations are one aspect. Because I think there is a kind of fatigue in the United States about looking after the world, which has been accelerated. This view has actually been accented further by President Trump coming into power, because he's a more an inward-looking president. On the second aspect, I think the presidential visit to India is an excellent opportunity when you have the president on your home turf to really put forward your concerns. So I think while the going has largely been good on Pakistan for us under the Trump administration, I think this is a treadmill. You can't get off this one. And you have, it's a constant conversation, because very often the Americans see tactical advantage in pleasing Pakistan, particularly for their game in Afghanistan. So I think our concerns on Pakistan, on its role, on the negative impact of the terrorist organizations and outfits coming out of Pakistan, it has to be underlined that this is not only playing out in Afghanistan, it plays out on our western borders. And similarly on Afghanistan, I mean, if India's concerns are not taken care by this deal, then I think we certainly have to put pressure because the impact is going to be felt by us.
Definitely.
The Americans may make the deal and walk away, but we are in the region.
And
So,
we have a lot at stake out there.
we have a lot of stake. We have also a huge contribution. So I think that has to be pushed forward.
Okay.
To what extent we can do it, I think we'll have to wait to see after the visit.
Okay, so let's wait on that aspect. But Indrani, your views on the policies vis-a-vis Afghan, theatre, and if we look at the way India is affected by all these policies, be it Afghanistan, be it Pakistan, because what US does in that particular region is something which directly affects us.
Absolutely. The only thing is I would agree with Navtej is that we've been here before. The US has been wanting to get out of Afghanistan for several years now. And it's not just this president, the president before this. So we have played this particular film. And I would say India has been making its own preparations in anticipation of a US withdrawal. How the trouble is not that the US would withdraw, because I think everybody understands that after 18 years, you need to get out of this particular theatre of war. India's concerns would largely be how does it impact US-Pakistan relations, and how does that impact India? Frankly, India has never believed that the Taliban would have been able to be so successful or been able to endure for so long if it hadn't been for official sanctioned support from Pakistan.
Okay.
And therefore, for us, we believe the epicenter of the problem is in Pakistan, is not really in Afghanistan.
Okay.
And how the US deals with Pakistan is something that we would be very keen on.
Okay, so these are all major aspects on which the relations between India and US can be seen: the regional policies, the global policies, economic trade, and with respect to the defense cooperation as well. But if you look at the tangibles here, Mr. Sibbal, after the President Trump has got into their flight back home, after that, if we look at it, what might be the tangible achievements, expecting it from here onwards? He's coming with a huge delegation. He's going to be in Ahmedabad. He's going to be in Agra. Delhi is the key place, of course, and that is where all the dialogue will happen.
Well, firstly, the fact that he's accompanied by some significant administration officials is neither here nor there. When a president of a country like the United States travels, he has to be accompanied by senior people. Otherwise, it would feel that he's not taking the interlocutor country seriously enough. So I think the fact that Jared Kushner is coming might be helpful, because he plays a major role in policy making on sensitive issues. That is one. The other is that when you look at this 2+2 dialogue that took place a few months ago, it was a very substantive dialogue, very substantive joint statement. In terms of defense, let's say, the kind of institutional arrangements that have been set up, the signing of the Industrial Security Annex, combining also I think some cooperation between some institutional body on innovation on our side and the US side, getting the startups together. So many other things. If you look at the 2+2, you will see that very substantial foundations were laid for an expanding defense relationship. Now, I was just wondering now, when the US president comes, I can't see anything new. One thing, of course, could have been the signing of BECA, but that is not going to happen, because that's still being negotiated.
Okay.
They have given us STA-1 status, and I can't see anything more than that. Major defense partner, I can't see anything more than that. We're going to buy some naval helicopters this time.
Yeah. MH-60 Romeo.
And when
and
we'll buy perhaps later on this system, air defense system for NCR, for which even we are at the most preliminary stage. So it'll be a long time before we actually sign anything in that regard. Okay. And similarly, with regard to some of the other items that they have put on the table, for example, the Sea Guardian, armed drones, that again, nothing has happened yet. So these are not going to be the results that will come from this visit. Insofar as geopolitics is concerned, yes, there will be an emphasis on all the things that we agreed upon in terms of maritime security and everything else. Now, the only thing we'll have to be a little watchful about is how far do we go in endorsing all this, because on the Indo-Pacific, we have stepped back a little bit. Prime Minister's speech at the Shangri-La conference took into account the sensibilities of the ASEAN countries and not got too far in sending an open, direct anti-Chinese message. So I'm just wondering what kind of formulations. On terrorism, the joint statements have been very good, but action on the ground has been good enough, but not really as much as we would have
Scope
wanted.
for more to be done.
And we would hope that Trump will not say something about mediation, saying that he considers Imran Khan a great leader, a great friend, a wonderful chap and stuff like that. I hope he doesn't get into that mode. But I think, and I'll conclude with that, the real message of the visit is in the visit itself. And I think it's a great credit to Modi's diplomacy that he got Obama twice over during his first tenure, and he got Trump over, despite the fact that he's an unpredictable fellow. And there's a risk involved, but I think they've built up a personal chemistry, and there is enough self-confidence on our side that we can handle Mr. Trump.
Okay. Mr. Sarna, it's a personal chemistry which is at work here between both the leaders. But in terms of tangibles, as Mr. Sibal was pointing out, we might have to look in for tangibles in terms of what exactly is being said on the geopolitics and terrorism as well, specifically.
I think when you go in for visits like this, you really don't have to have a list of tangibles and judge the success of the visit. It's always nice to have a few deals signed in front of the cameras. But I think besides the defense deals that were mentioned and possibly some others, I think you'll see a joint statement which will build upon the 2+2 joint statement and try to take these issues forward. But I would say that, when you look back on these visits 10 years, 20 years later, what you see is the overall impact they had on the relationship. And I think this is the occasion our desired tangible should be. I mean, South Bloc would surely be looking at making this such a successful visit for President Trump. A great moment at the Motera Stadium, huge applause, large crowds. He loves these things. Something that, he has a great experience of Taj and etc., which builds upon his already positive image of India. He's, before becoming president, he's had a good experience of India. His family has visited India and so on. So leave him with a very positive impression of India as a reliable defense partner, India as an economy with potential, India as a democracy with which he can bond in a larger worldview, besides, of course, all the other issues on the Indo-Pacific and all on which the officials will work. But really, the thing would be to give such a dose of a good feeling, a warm, fuzzy feeling to President Trump, which then plays out on the rest of the relationship.
Okay. Indrani, concluding comments from you on what might be seen.
I think we will see India enabling a Trump show. I mean, if basically he's going to have his biggest ever rally in India, and I think that itself will be the biggest deliverable for this visit.
Okay, so it's about the personal chemistry between both the leaders, as all of you are pointing out. Thank you so much, Mr. Sibal, Mr. Sarna, and Indrani there as well. As our panelists are pointing out, there's a lot to watch out for, and in terms of